really looking forward to a conversation, a great topic of conversation with today's guest, Rory Cellan-Jones. Welcome.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Now, for our listeners, I'm Dr. Tom Adler. I was a GP in the Peak District for 30 years. And to cut a long story short, I really saw a lot of my patients having struggles with aging, accidental falls particularly. And I've stepped away from general practice to work on a preventative solution to try and reduce those falls occurring, de-stress carers, and hopefully save some resources for the NHS and social care. Carol, over to you.
Hello, listeners, and hello, Rory. My name is Dr. Carol Sargent. I'm a scientist by profession. I worked for big pharmaceutical companies for more years than I tend to want to remind myself. Dementia entered my family's life, and I completely changed what I do. I now I'm all about opening the world of travel, tourism and hospitality for people living with dementia through working with businesses to highlight how they are inclusive and how they can be more inclusive, and working with the dementia community to help them to identify the solutions to enable and empower them to go on the holidays that they really want to go on but are perhaps a little bit trepidatious. So, Tom, back to you.
Thanks, Carol. So, and really, the ethos of the podcast that we came together, some background in Scotland and Aberdeen in our past, and we have shared overlapping experience about travel, family history with some dementia, and I think we're concerned that disability, underrepresented people with dementia, people with chronic illnesses were not getting a fair shout when it came to in terms of the travel industry, hospitality industry. We wanted to highlight some issues by inviting on some fantastic guests to hear their perspective on the issue, not so much ours, but theirs. And we're really interested today to hear from Rory. As Carol said, we're really grateful for you coming on the show tonight. Thank you. Perhaps would you like me to introduce a few things I know about Rory, or would you like to
go on? Do your best, do your worst.
Right. It's hard to fit in the whole, the intro in the whole of the podcast, I would guess. But a long history, around 40 years in the BBC. Many of those as the BBC technology correspondent. All the while becoming a multi-book author, and most recently, perhaps 3 years ago, stepping away from the BBC, working on your newsletter, your Substack newsletter, which is syndicated across all your social media channels, which is very popular. Also, the podcast, which is yourself has started in the last year, the Movers and Shakers podcast, enormously popular again, highlighting the challenges and the struggles of those with Parkinson's disease. Again, perhaps struggles challenges that are not being currently met, and interesting topics around that. And that's on the back of your publicised development of Parkinson's around 2019. And the subsequent, journey, to use an inverted commas term, of how that disease has progressed, and the challenges you've met along the way. And then, add in a dose of Sophie from Romania, the much heralded dog struggles that you've had over the last year, in spite of Sophie being, a wonderful guest in your house. Some of the time has been behind your sofa. So, we're really excited to hear some stuff, to maybe challenge you and hear your thoughts on various topics. And anything you'd want to add to that, Rory?
Well, that's a great biog. I should also say I've got a memoir out, which is the opposite of technology. It's about my mother, and it tells the story in the thousands of letters she left behind. telling a dramatic story of her life at the BBC and the affair which gave rise to me, all through her letters, which I found in the council flat where I was brought up by her after she died. And it's a real contrast with today. It makes one think, I think, about what we will leave behind. Will our kids find out all about us from our WhatsApp messages? Probably not. I'd rather have thousands of letters to rely on. So that's been preoccupying me too.
And that's Ruskin Park, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's met with great reception. I know you expressed some struggles from your early Amazon days with the publication and availability, but hopefully that's you've got past that.
Book trade is fascinating. It's it's let's put it this way: it's struggled to make its supply chain move from the 20th into the 21st century.
So, what I wanted to hear more in terms of about you yourself was what is your sort of relationship with travel, and I was thinking about how that met you in terms of as you grew up with your family traveling, then perhaps as a single adult, and then a married person and the kids, and then more as a couple again at the far end. Is travel something that's been really important to you?
Oh, yes. And it was really important to my mum, who had very little money. The very first thing I found in this extraordinary collection of letters and documents when I cleared her flat many years ago was a ticket, an air ticket to Le Touquet in 1934, when she would have been 20, and an accountant's secretary in Birmingham. And it represented something interesting about her, which was that however little money she had, she really thought holidays were important. And just imagine what it was like to climb onto a biplane in 1934 for a day trip to the Touquet. I mean, that was real pioneering stuff. And I think I inherited that. Well, certainly the love of holidays, because it was escape from the dreary flat where she brought me up, mostly to seaside places in Bournemouth and Devon and Cornwall. But once, when I was 12, on a rail journey across Europe to Lake Lugano, which struck me as tremendously exciting. And then once I had my independence, I lived abroad for a while. I lived in Berlin, West Berlin, at the height of the Cold War, and in Paris for a year as a teacher during my degree. And what I slightly regret is looking at kids today who all make it to the Far East and everywhere. My travels were mostly confined to Europe, were Interrail and so on. And I wish I'd travelled a bit more to the Far East. These days, the dog is keeping me home. I'm slightly resenting the dog keeping me home because one of us has to be at home with the dog, and we've managed the odd weekend away. But I'm looking forward to traveling again once the dog gets a bit more confident. I love the west coast of the United States, where I worked a lot, and I also love Venice, where we go every 5 years for our wedding anniversary. So those are some of my favourite places.
Fantastic. I went to Venice for my 10th wedding anniversary some years ago. So there you go. In terms of your European experience, was technology in those days, did you feel it was more advanced in Europe compared to back in old UK?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, certainly not when I was sort of doing Interrail. What was more advanced was the railway system and the accuracy of the railway system. I travelled on one of my sort of internet journeys, Interrail journeys as a student, with a friend who was a complete train spotter, and he carried with him the Thomas Cook ABC of European railways, and would flick through it and say, yes, the 1723 from Bâle to Lugano leaves from that platform. And I was amazed by that. And so the railway networks seemed much more efficient and slick than back home. But I wouldn't say there was a great difference in terms of technology. And for me, the transformative power of technology has come in the last 25 years, obviously, once people began to use the internet, once the World Wide Web made the internet usable, then travel became a completely different experience, or at least, fixing your travel and finding out where you were and coping abroad became a very different experience.
Do you think that we're better prepared in traveling now that we can do it all ourselves, or should we be seeking a little bit more advice sometimes and not end up in a bit of a pickle? Yeah.
I think it's given us great freedom to do it ourselves. I did. I mean, I can't remember when I last used a travel agent. Maybe 15 years ago when we did a trip to Australia. But one thing that I do reflect upon is we used to go to France every summer to a gîte in different parts of Brittany, and I always used to immerse myself in local media because I studied French. So I used to buy the French newspaper, which had nothing much in it, very typical local French newspaper, which started off with pictures of the village fete and then would also have the international news, and it was a strange mixture. And what's happened is that we have taken our media with us as it's all gone online. You can get, the BBC, you can get your Netflix or whatever. You can take your world with you, and I think that makes us less immersed in the worlds which we're visiting, which is a bit sad, really.
Yeah.
No, absolutely get that point. And we, Carol and I have really been interested in terms of how technology is supporting those with disability or perhaps dementia or challenges of aging. Do you feel technology is helping or hindering those challenges?
Well, I really do think it's helping. I mean, you obviously know a lot more about it than me, but I've had quite a lot of dealings with a good friend of mine was sort of professor of assistive design at the Royal College of Art, ran something called the Helen Hamlin Centre.
Oh, yes.
And they used to have an exhibition, which I used to go to every summer. And what struck me was that this sort of assistive design, it was basically just good design, and things that were meant for people with various disabilities. Actually, in some ways, it ended up them leading the way. I mean, because what was good assistive design was good design, full stop. And so you saw, I mean, particularly when the iPhone came along, you saw an awful lot of stuff happening under the bonnet that was just really interesting.
So do you think,
as you have, sorry, Carol.
I was just going to say, so do you think technology is an enabler to allow people to do things that they can't, or is it something that's driving people to enjoy different things? Which do you think comes first?
Well, I mean, it is obviously an enabler. It obviously, I mean, one slightly sad way of looking at it would be that the whole virtual reality or augmented reality revolution could sort of make travel redundant. I can travel the world with a advanced headset with a Microsoft HoloLens or perhaps with the Apple Vision Pro if you've got $3,500 to spare. I don't actually need to go through all the hassle of, which is a nightmare, of going through an airport and all of that. I could just strap a mask on and off we go. But I think also, and this has only just begun to strike me because I'm sort of 5 years into Parkinson's and beginning to be a bit crumbly. It does sort of, in some ways, having the information on a phone, on a screen that you can talk to if necessary, rather than buried in files of paper that you can't get to, does make things slightly easier. Does smooth your path through those experiences.
Yeah, I
And
was going to say, one of the things that somebody with a physical disability, highlighted that the ability to record the information and not have to worry about how to write it down, yeah, or send it, and these sorts of
Well, I
things.
tell you, the thing that's transformed my life, as somebody who no longer really types very well and his handwriting has been awful, is AI-powered transcription. I record just about every interview I do using something called Otter, which I can then go back to and cut and paste and edit and listen to again. So in that context, it's given me great freedom. And then, of course, there's the sort of instant translation that's available, which is, I suppose, again, available to everybody, but maybe of particular use if you have a disability or have something which makes your voice difficult to hear. I mean, one sad aspect of Parkinson's, which, touch wood, I haven't really got yet, is that it can affect your voice, make it very weak. My colleague on the Movers and Shakers podcast, Mark Mardell, great broadcaster, he's suffered particularly from that and is sort of researching ways of dealing with that. But in those, certainly when you're traveling, you need your voice to be heard, and technology can help there.
And I know last couple of episodes of the podcast, you've talked about the Parkies Charter, around 5 things maybe that people with Parkinson's should be, have the right maybe to be offered or have access to, as it were. Do you think travel should be in there somewhere, or is it already in there? Is it
No, that's not in there. I mean, I don't think you can say to the government, we've got a right to travel. I mean, that is a more general thing for anybody with a disability, that trains should have accessible entries and exits, that everywhere you go, you should be given proper access. I mean, my old colleague Frank Gardner has been very good at highlighting how bad the airlines are and the airports are at making themselves accessible to people with disabilities. So that's a slightly different area. Now, the Parkinson Charter, I mean, the most the standout demand is simply for access to neurologists. We've had so many letters, emails from people who say that their GP has referred them to a neurologist thinking that they might have Parkinson's, and then they have to wait a year or more for that appointment, which is appalling. And it's led to what is effectively the creeping privatization of that part of the health service, because lots of those people have decided, if they can afford it, to spend a few £100 on a private consultation.
And I think that is sad. It's a sort of reflection of where we are in many specialities, really. Particularly, as Carol will testify, I think with dementia and dementia diagnosis. There are, as we've seen in often in the news, there are new potential treatments come on board, but they have to fit a number of criteria to fit the trial usage. Which is obviously very expensive if it's ever going to be funded by NICE and the NHS. And if it's going to take 18 months to see a psychogeriatrician, and then wait another 4 months to get a CT head scan, and then wait another 4 months to have your outpatient appointment, and then maybe start treatment to see if you respond to that. The whole thing is a 2-year journey to get there, which is frustrating.
But there's a technology story there which I've been sort of really chasing, because actually treatment of Parkinson's there's a lot of technology about to come in, but it seems to be very delayed to monitor it, and possibly help get one out of that cycle of waiting a year between appointments and nothing much happening. There's a pilot gone on in the southwest of England, and I'm on the patient involvement committee for something called home-based care, which would mean that maybe you wouldn't even get a face-to-face appointment with a neurologist very often, but you would have a whole bunch of people who, from Parkinson's nurse to physiotherapist to the consultant themselves, that you could contact for advice in a flexible way. And technology would be absolutely vital in this. Either smart watches to give quite a regular readout on what your symptoms were like, or an app. I'm right now testing an app called New Health, NEU Health, which attempts to deliver data from patients to doctors via getting you to do a daily series of exercises into the phone, some of them speaking into the phone, to measure your symptoms, because the difficulty with Parkinson's is measurement. It's such a crude thing to know what exactly is going on and how you're responding to drugs throughout the day.
And dementia is very similar in many ways, in the sense of having ways to measure how somebody is progressing and the different symptoms that a certain individual has and another doesn't, to know how you adapt. But one of the key things is about having the confidence to go out of your house and continue to meet other people. How do you think technology can help us to maintain, those social interactions? I think it was the US head of health said loneliness was the new tobacco. How do you think technology can help us to stop loneliness?
There are two ways to look at it. I mean, there's no doubt that connecting people, I'm thinking of Parkinson's here, bringing them together is really valuable. And, our podcast is one example of something that is bringing people together. And lots of people are telling us that they're getting more advice from our podcast than they've ever got from the health system. But also bringing networks of people together obviously is a lot easier if you just want a virtual meeting as we're having now. It's somehow the challenge is combining that with the real world, which I still think is incredibly important. Using it as a facilitator rather than the be all and end all, because things still happen when people meet face to face that don't happen, when you're just down the line.
I mean, we're enormous fans of that. Rory, you've been kind enough to write some nice words about me in the last year, and Bide, the innovation, because I felt falls in particular were a challenge in Parkinson's because of the sort of stepwise deterioration one can have as a result of a fall. Now, again, well publicised, and you seem to be doing very well, but that, seeing you over a TV screen doesn't tell me how your elbow's doing and this sort of stuff. You had a nasty fall outside, which smashed you up, and some average experiences after that. Confidence and fear of falling, that is that a thing for you or for your community at all?
It really was. It was a huge shock to me, because I knew about from talking to people like you how important and dangerous a symptom falls were. And my fall, it could have happened without Parkinson's. It was in the dark. I fell over a branch hurrying down a dark street, smashed myself up really badly, broke my elbow, lost a tooth and so on. But what it really did was something you were just talking about. It really hit my confidence for the next couple of months. I was frightened to go out. I'm kind of over that now and forging my way ahead, but it was certainly a shock to the system.
And to segue in terms of falls and your experience with your sort of succession of skiing holidays, and reviewing how last 2 years ago to last year, and your decision to make that your last skiing holiday because of falls, obviously a different scenario. But is that can you empathise with other people in similar circumstances who are having to give up their travel plans because
Oh
of other
goodness, yes. I mean, we're we're all obviously on a downward path, not to be too depressing, and we all have to decide when is the moment to stop. And for me, uh, I not a great skier, and I had a terrible fall actually 20 odd years ago, no, 26 years ago, where I broke my arm, but kept on skiing after that. Uh, and I hadn't skied for several years after my Parkinson's diagnosis for various reasons. And then I did, and was gratified the first time I went in 2022 that I could still do it. Not well, but I could still do it. And I was obviously weaker and so on. And then last year, when I went again, I had just tipped over the edge, uh, and I'd gone back to, week 2 of skiing, whereby every turn was a nightmare, and I was exhausted, and I just had to think about it and decide, no, you've got to know when to stop, and that's now.
And could you see any way that technology could change that? That maybe assistive technology, or allowing the hospitality venues to make better accommodation. And is that just knowing about disability and chronic illness, or is there some
I don't.
technology?
I don't think it was. I mean, I do think, and again, I come back to my colleague Frank Gardner, who is amazing, who skis on a sort of chair at great speed. So there are ways of making it possible, and I think lots of resorts are beginning to extend the life of skiers in terms of being able to get onto the slopes. But there still comes a time when you have to say to yourself, am I still enjoying this? And if the fear is greater than the fun, it's probably time to stop.
Yeah, and I used to be an avid skier, too, but I've had one hip replaced, both knees, and I have that fear of not wanting to have that fall and stop while I'm still enjoying it. And one of the really interesting applications I heard about for AI that I thought was really neat was for underprivileged children looking for career counselling, that they could go and highlight the different things that they were interested in, and share perhaps more information than they might with another human being. And then, lo and behold, here were the careers for children to consider. Do you think there's the opportunity, when we reach a point and we're not able to do some of the things on holiday or in life in general, that AI could come up with a range of different things that we could perhaps try and see if we enjoyed them?
Well, potentially. I mean, what you're raising a very interesting point, which is our interaction with AI, with bots, with avatars, and so on, which I have been skeptical about. I, I used to hear a lot about the potential for kind of robots to work in care homes, and I found it very dehumanizing. Some of what was explained to me, this sort of robot head, which would converse with somebody, and the line was, "They will never get bored with hearing the same question 100 times in a row," whereas a human would be driven mad, and that seemed very dehumanizing. But in some contexts, um, being able to speak to uh, a kind of anonymous chatbot where you don't really want that human interaction, you just want the information delivered efficiently, I think could be very effective. Although I have to say, as somebody who's spent several hours on the phone to their broadband supplier about various things over the last few weeks, there's a long way to go before a bot is able to do what a human can do.
Absolutely, and we know along those lines, we know that about 30% of the population in the UK are not connected to the internet for whatever reason, be that financial, be that their ethnic minorities, underserved, underrepresented populations, rural populations. And are we? The more we're pushing technology, which is fantastic for those who are connected, are we increasing the divide between those who are connected and are technologically able, and those who aren't, or who aren't able to, from maybe their cognitive decline or depression or whatever?
Well, I think this is a really interesting area. I'm a big believer in that you shouldn't stop the development of these new forms of contact technology because some people might miss out. Because I had a very convincing explanation of that in relation to systems for GPs to communicate remotely to patients, and the explanation was that the more people took up that kind of automated interaction with a chatbot or whatever, the more time the people still doing the phone call, the traditional phone call, would have available to them. So that at the moment, we're all desperately scrambling to phone the GP at 8:30 exactly to get the appointment, and we're all left in the lurch and dismayed and disgruntled. If in most cases that could be triaged and done online, then there would be more capacity for the people who really needed the phone call. The trouble is, you must make sure that is budgeted for. I mean, there's a parallel in banking whereby most of us never go into a branch anymore, and there's been a debate, and some banks are claiming that they are now putting in special facilities whereby people who can't, do stuff over the internet will be able to, have dedicated facilities either on the phone or in person. But it's making sure that those promises are kept that's important.
Yeah, and building on that, and what do you think we should be doing to give particularly older adults more confidence about using technology? That
I think we're beginning to get to the stage, and again, this company I was talking to was telling me this, having done some research here, that we shouldn't assume that it's the oldsters that don't get it. I am just turned 66. I'm an oldster, and I am not atypical of people my age and older in being, perfectly happy doing things online. It may be more to do with poverty and ethnic background, but I think we've got to be better at explaining to people what is available and how it's available, and making it simpler to understand.
I think you're absolutely right. Communication and how you learn to use a particular app. I know, my kids, they just try it out, and if it doesn't work, they try something else. They press another button and they do it. It's a kind of different way of learning. Whereas I'm more used to having some levels of instructions that I'll look at and then I'll have a go. Some people like to go through instructions in
I'm
quite a
terrible. I
long.
never read the manual. I make it a point of principle never to read the manual.
I'm not
Although my
sure.
wife
It could
tells
be
me,
a low percentage you do, Rory, I guess.
yeah, yeah. My wife tells this terrible story about me trying to assemble an IKEA wardrobe and cursing, and she's sending me out for a walk. When I came back, of course, she'd done it. She read the manual.
Excellent. Now, that's absolutely fantastic. Carol, I don't know if you've got anything else for Rory at this stage of our conversation.
I suppose it was thinking about, developments for Parkinson's to enable people to have that confidence to go, out of their homes. I know I was at an Aging Better conference, and there were developments of walkers that you could put your mobile phone in, so you could have Google Maps, so you could have the confidence as you were going around. So mixing, technology and traditional, if you like, to enhance the experiences. What do you think are the developments that are needed?
I think that's really quite niche. There's a whole bunch of. I think the assistive technologies are sort of in the minority. What I was talking about earlier, I mean, there are two big areas. There's technology to help diagnose it more quickly, more easily, and there's a lot happening there. I was involved in the Royal Institution Christmas lectures, where a guy's developed a pen that uses AI and can diagnose Parkinson's much earlier. And there's a brilliant development. I don't know if you've heard about the woman who can smell Parkinson's. Extraordinary woman. Well, they're taking that idea and scaling it, because obviously she can't go around the country smelling people they've got Parkinson's. But using a mass spectrometer, which is sort of available in most big hospitals, take a swab off the back of your neck. I had this done, and it can give a readout of whether you've got Parkinson's or not. So that's one area. Then the other area is the big area is using all sorts of wearables to measure your symptoms and chart the rate of progress. And then there is a bit of stuff about mobility. And in particular, there's a whole range of gadgets using something called cueing, which is basically setting up a rhythm to encourage you to walk better. I've tried a couple of these. There's something called the Q1, which is sort of buzzer, which you put on your chest, and it emits a sort of a constant buzz with a rhythm. And the theory is that will help you walk better. I have to say it didn't work for me, but there's a lot of research going into that. What I was slightly more intrigued by was a little device that you clip to your shoe, and it beeps when you walk correctly. So it helps you to set up a rhythm of your walking, which
is that like a pressure pad type device, or
it's not even a pressure pad. It's sort of, it clips literally to the edge of your shoe, and somehow uses all sorts of clever. I mean, everything's got AI in it these days, isn't it? Whether it has or not, to sort of measure the weight of your steps, and the idea is the audio signal will sort of encourage you to. I find this quite funny, because my first sign that I had Parkinson's was the summer before I was diagnosed, being on a walking holiday with my wife, and her saying, "Pick up your feet, man! You're dragging your feet." And that was the first sign. So having an audio thing that basically told you to pick up your feet might work. Who knows?
Super. That's really really helpful. Thanks, Rory. We have got a final section, if that's okay. It's
Sure.
some sort of quick hit questions, and would like to be sort of spontaneous with your answers and see what we come up with. So I'll go first. And the question was going to be, tell us about your favourite holiday and why was it your favourite? But I would have to add to the start of that, apart from trekking down to see Brentford play football, what is your favourite occupation?
What is my favourite?
Yeah.
Favourite holiday?
Yes, favourite trip out, favourite holiday.
Well, I tell you, the funny thing about work travel which is absolutely not holiday, is in some ways it's the best kind of holiday you can have because you expect nothing from it. And anything you do is a bonus. And as a journalist, you get to go to places that you would never go as a holidaymaker. So I had a trip to India 20 years ago, the only time I've been to India, where we went to 10 places, where we went to 3 places across India in 10 days. We went to Kerala to look at a Coca-Cola factory that was accused of stealing people's water. We went to Ahmedabad in Gujarat and went to peasant houses where they were growing genetically modified cotton, and there was a row about that. And then we went to Mumbai and Pune to see the car industry. And it was just a chaotic, exciting adventure where we got to see stuff that, as I say, I would never see as a tourist. And I'm really sad I've never been back.
I've never been to India. I don't know about you, Carol, but it sounds an amazing place.
No, I've never been, but I think the best holiday experiences are the ones you don't expect to have. That's my experience. Switching tacks, and you're only allowed one answer for this one. What's the most innovative technology you've seen? Can be at any time.
Well, that's really interesting. I'm torn between two things, but you would only let me have one. I have to say my job officially as technology correspondent at the BBC, although I'd been doing it for years, but I was appointed officially in January 2007, and I went over to the big gadget fest called CES, but I persuaded the BBC, who was investing quite a lot of money in this coverage, that we should take one day out and go to San Francisco because Apple were rumored to be about to launch something big, which meant that I was in the hall when the iPhone was unveiled. And that was an extraordinary moment. I mean, I was a bit cynical about it as a British journalist, all this sort of hoopla and hurrah going on. And then I was sort of won over because it looked so different.
Steve was up on the stage, was he giving it?
Steve Jobs. It's worth watching. It's the single greatest product launch you'll ever see, and much imitated and never equaled. I mean, he walks onto the stage wearing his black polo neck and steel frame glasses and looks like an old-fashioned preacher, and looks down at the floor and then looks up and says, "We're going to make history here today." And it's kind of, oh wow.
So that was history, in itself, really.
Yeah, it was. In fact, I was called onto the BBC complaints program, Newswatch, because somebody said, "Oh, that shouldn't have been on the news. That's just a product plug." And I said, rather taking my courage in my hands, well, if the BBC had been around, the BBC News Division had been around when the Model T Ford was launched, would covering that have been a plug for a product? You could say that, but the Model T Ford changed the world, made motoring accessible, and maybe the iPhone will do the same. And in fact, the impact of the iPhone was enormous. It was just the launch of the smartphone era and all that's brought with it.
Brilliant. And I'm going to be cheeky because I'm sure the listeners would love to know what the second one was.
Well, I was going to say, the first time I used an Amazon Echo, just the fact of being able to talk to a device and it talking back. It's amazing how quickly these things become routine and we become cynical about them. But there is a sense of wonder the first time you try anything. And then that quickly wears off and you begin swearing at them.
But I think, and certainly in the dementia community, the Echo and the equivalents have made a huge difference, an absolutely enormous difference to people's lives. Yeah. That's yes. For sure. Anyway, Tom, I'll be quiet now.
No, that's fine. That's great. So maybe a final one, slightly more general. Why is it important, do you think, for people to consider the concept of inclusivity for all?
Well, I mean, 2 reasons. Basic humanity. We're all probably going to end up with some kind of disability. at some stage. So why not make the world a more inclusive place? And also, it's a source of great creativity, and is. I talked about what's happening in all sorts of areas of technology that becomes applicable to everyone. I come back to the fact good inclusive design is just good design. So why not try it?
That's fantastic.
Brilliant,
Yes, great answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you
Well,
very,
Rory,
very much. Yeah.
indeed, we must thank you for agreeing to join us and spread the word about our. It's really an important message, we feel, but it's really great to hear what's happening from the technology side of things and how that can be applied across to become more all inclusive. So thank you to you. Thank you for our listeners as well. I hope you've all enjoyed that, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time. And Rory, unless there's anything else you want to mention, which you're welcome to, would say thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.